Welcome back, friends. It looks to me like the Suzukis have taken over for the Yamahas for the time being. I stumbled across this 2008 RMZ 250. This bike looks like it's been sitting for quite a long time. A very nice gentleman that I bought it off of started acquiring parts for it at a slow pace, and I apparently lost interest in rebuilding the bike, so the Rooster's got it now. Now, I'm not 100% sure why this was taken apart. The cylinder, the head, the bottom end, all look pretty good on it. So we're gonna have to get into some measuring and find out what's going on. Now, what I was told is it sat outside for a while. There may be some water in the bottom end, so for sure we're gonna drain the oil out of that, make sure there's no liquid in there. Crankshaft looks good and spins fine at just a quick glance. It looks like we have pretty much all the parts here, including some new parts that were acquired. So let's take a walk around and find out what I got myself into on this one. Again, not being a Yamaha, front wheel bearings are fine. The front tire has a ton of cracking, so probably have to get into replacing that. Fork seals are not showing any signs of leaking. Front brake pads look fine. Steering stem bearings are tight. All this stuff is loose. It has been taken apart, obviously. Carburetor sitting in there. Plastic bag to keep the elements out. Certainly be looking at a new O-ring chain. Seat cover. Back tire's in pretty good shape. I don't feel any play. Suspension and shock linkage feels tight in the back, no play. Rear brake pad's in good shape, albeit missing the guard. And I think when I'm done with it, it's still going to be missing the guard. The plastics are not terrible, so I won't have to get anything there. I'll put a new set of grips on it, obviously. Somebody's got some fancy matching throttle cable. That's decent. The hot start lever is broken, but moving. Bent brake lever. However, the brakes feel fine. So we're going to get a set of breakaway levers. And the clutch lever is, you can see it. And there's no free play in this thing. It pulls for days. So for sure we'll get a set of levers for it. Well, let's get this engine unwrapped. Hour meter. Those are always extremely trustworthy. The engine rotates over nice. I'm going to cut this chain off, get it out of my way so we can listen to the bearings.
Everything feels real good on this bike. The kicker actually is nice and tight. The bottom end feels nice and tight. Let's go ahead and drain the oil out of this thing and see if we can look for any metal flake or anything that might be in the oil. Wow. Well, time to do what Rat did in the 80s and lay it down. Ah, well, I guess the point is moot. The drain plug is not even in it. Somebody must have already drained the water out. All right, well, before I rip this bike apart and inspect everything else on there, let's take a look at what came with it in the basket. We got a dented up exhaust system. That's fine. Got a header, doesn't appear to be bent. We've got a cylinder and a head. Cylinder looks decent. Of course, we're gonna have to measure. The head with the cams, valves look good. Now, I looked at this when I was there just to make sure that these cam bridges weren't destroyed, and they're fine. They're actually in really good shape. Cams look like they're in really good shape. Got a piston Wiseco. For whatever reason, it's damaged on the skirts. Not going to be usable. Not going to be usable. Oh, we got a new drain plug and the head bolts, magnetic drain plug, and the rocker cover bolts. Not really rockers, but cam cover bolt. Ignition coil, cam cover. This does not go to this bike in any way, shape, or form. Brand new air filter. Man, this is all stuff I don't have to buy. It's crazy. Motor mounts, head bolts, carburetor kit, bent, damaged spark plug. Oh no, plug's in good shape. Oil fill plug, billet style, blue in color. A new air oil filter. The old Wiseco. Got some O-rings, some gaskets, a set of rings, and a brand new Wiseco piston. I like it. And in here, miscellaneous nuts and bolts. And we've got our tensioner. A top end gasket kit. A cam chain guide. And a brand new cam chain. I'll tell you, it really looks like, except for a couple little tiny things, cosmetic stuff and like the chain and the seat and stuff like that, a couple little things here and there, I'm gonna have all the parts to put this together, which makes this a fantastic buy so far. Let's keep digging in. That's clean. The crankshaft webs do have a little bit of light surface rust on them. But it actually looks like it's in really good condition. I think I'm going to go ahead and gamble and just throw a top end together on this thing and hope I make the right choice without pulling the bottom end apart. Oh yeah, the old Suzuki 4-speed. Now we're going to measure the cylinder bore and see what kind of condition the cylinder is in. We're going to be measuring for out of round. In other words, difference between this side and this side. Secondly, we're going to be measuring for taper to see if the bore has any taper. And what we're looking for is a cylinder bore size no greater than 3.0321 inches. So we are under the maximum spec for this of 3.0321. Of course, I'm going to take a bunch of different measurements and make sure that it's good all the way up and down, left and right, top and bottom. I'm going to start prepping this bottom end to accept the top end. Oof. There's some garbage in there. I feel like I might be having a little bit of a change of heart here. There is some junk in here. We got to pull this engine out, split these cases, and take a real close look at what's going on inside of here. Clean but dirty. Very strange. I don't know if we've got a Destroyed clutch plates here. You can see how there's no tabs here, so that's going to be interesting. I wonder if that's why this was pulled apart. Some kind of clutch issue. Wow. Yeah, totally destroyed. Somebody's been venturing in here already, as the tabs are bent over. Clutch basket doesn't look too bad. Now keep in mind on this primary clutch nut, Suzuki likes to use a reverse thread. So we want to tighten it, technically, to loosen it. Shaft's a little tight on there. Try to get this counter shaft sleeve out. They usually don't want to come out, but this one came right out. And that's all I'm going to take apart on this side. Let's flip this over and get the case bolts out. We're going to go ahead and use our case splitter tool. Get these things pushed apart. And the idea behind this tool is this center rod will push on your crankshaft. These little wings are going to bolt to your case, essentially pushing the crankshaft through your bearing. They are a little bit of a press fit. And this we want to do by hand. As we tighten this, you should see your cases start to split, assuming that we've got all our bolts out, which is something you definitely want to double check. As you can see, it's opening up here. A lot of times this counter shaft is going to need a little bit of persuading to go through that bearing, so you can lightly tap that. In this particular case, we're noticing up here in this corner there's a dowel pin in here, and this dowel pin's hanging up just a little bit. So right in here is not a sealing point for this case. So if you have to do any tapping, right there is going to be where you want to do it. Yeah, she's a mess in there for sure. Got a lot of metal shavings. Where is our failure? Is that a previous piston maybe? Big chunks. So all the bearings feel pretty good. So it's not a bearing failure. All right, let's go ahead and get this transmission apart. One thing you definitely want to keep track of where all these washers come out from. All right, let me get this crankshaft out. Use the same procedure here to push it through. So that makes it real easy to push these out without doing any kind of damage to them. This tool set is, I think, like under $100 for the splitter and the crankshaft pusher. It's totally worth the money. In fact, I would say it's necessary. That's as far as I'm going to disassemble this. But right now, let's get this over to the parts washer and get all this stuff cleaned out of here. It must have been from a previous failure because I don't see anything wrong with the transmission or the bottom end in any way, shape, or form. Put the garbage in there. Let's get this over to the parts washer and get this one cleaned up too. Now, these transmissions can get confusing sometimes putting them back together. If you ever get lost on where the washers go or anything like that, you could always go to like Rocky Mountain ATV or something like that. Look at the transmission, and it will tell you the order in which everything goes. These Suzukis are some of the easiest transmissions to put in. These crankshafts are a little bit of a press fit into these bearings. So what I like to do is heat the center of the bearing. I've had my crankshaft in the freezer for a couple of hours, which will shrink the crankshaft, and this should slide right in, no problem. Sometimes if you don't follow this procedure, it's very difficult to get this crankshaft to go in. I like to give these gaskets a very light coating of RTV with a hard rubber roller. Helps to spread it out a little bit, and it helps to seal in case there's any imperfections in the case. Find a socket just a little bit bigger than your dowel pin, and you can push that right on without distorting the gasket in any way, shape, or form. Now while our crankshaft is still cold, I'm going to heat this other bearing and slide these two cases halves together. Again, if you do it like this, it all slides together fairly easily. However, if you can't do it fast enough to where this crankshaft is warmed up, you'll have to use your crankshaft puller tool to pull it through the bearings. Let's get these bolts in and torqued up. And once you get it torqued down, critical to make sure that everything still rotates freely and nothing's binding up. All right. I like to use a blue Loctite for any bolts that are inside of the engine. Now this washer is concave. In other words, it's on a little bit of an angle. You want the widest part of the angle towards the gear and the narrowest part up towards the nut. Keep in mind when you're putting this on that it is a reverse thread. Go ahead and torque this nut to 65 foot-pounds and then clear off all the residual Loctite. Do your absolute best not to get any down inside this hole. Suzuki's used to have, on some of the older models, used to have notches that you had to line up. This one here just has a fat spline. If you just line that up, you'll be good. Make sure you get your spring on. If you remember, we had the broken clutch here. The clutch kit that I wanted to order has been not available for some time. So I have a used clutch off another RMZ 250 that's in really good shape. I'll put this in here temporarily just so we can get this motor together. Now we slide this down, we need to make sure that this is going to mesh with this main gear. Don't force it. Give this cylinder a light hone to restore the cross hatching. All right, next critical step, I'm going to check my piston ring end gap. When I got this, they had already installed the rings on this piston, so I'm going to pull this off. And Wiseco has its own system of measurement here. They basically want you to do is follow this chart. And what we're going to be doing is 0.0040 times the bore. So we got to figure out exactly what the bore is, because I don't remember off the top of my head. I'm going to go to inches. .029. So 0.012 inch. .012, that's 0.30 millimeter, and that goes through just fine. Now if that did not go through, we would have to file the ring end gaps, but we're in good shape here. Next I'm going to get the ring end gap placements proper on the piston and get the piston in this cylinder. Once I got my ring end gaps where I need them to be, I like to go ahead and put this right in the cylinder now and then drop the whole assembly onto the connecting rod. I feel like it makes it a lot easier. Now when doing this, we obviously want to maintain our orientation. So this being the exhaust side of the cylinder or the front of the engine, there's an arrow on the piston. There'll usually be some sort of mark, and that generally will point towards the front of the engine as well. You can also look at it and see that the reliefs for the intake valves are much larger than the exhaust valve. So what we'll do is flip this over and we'll get this installed in this cylinder. You really got to watch these oil control rings, that they don't get bound up going in here. That's important. You just want to get it down far enough where you can still get your piston pin in. Just get a rag over your crankcase in case that circlip falls when you're trying to install it. You won't have to fish it out. These can sometimes be a struggle, but make sure it's 100% sitting in that groove. Next, I want to take the cylinder head apart, get everything cleaned real well, replace the seals, and get it shimmed properly. down at the bottom of the valve guide. There's a steel spring seat on the bottom to protect the aluminum head. They're usually tricky to get out because the oil stiction just holds them in there. Wash them out with a little brake fluid and usually a little air. If you can't get a magnet down there, we'll get these things out. Now we can just take this head over and get it cleaned up real good. Alright, so at this point here, I'm just going to send the head out and have it resurfaced. I just got the head back from the machine shop, and man, does it look good. Nice and flat. I'm going to go ahead and check our valves and make sure none of them are bent. Easy way to do that. Chuck them up in the old drill and give them a slow spin. If they were bent, you'd see that head wobble back and forth. Now all these valve stems are the same size, and with this particular kit they're all the same color for the seals. Sometimes they come brown, sometimes they come green. You got to check with the manufacturer and see where they want them put. Once we got our valves reinstalled, support the head up on something that'll keep the valves from hitting the table. And we're just going to lightly tap on the stems and seat these keepers. If you skip this step, there's a possibility that your valve adjustment could go out after the cams make a few rotations and these seat. Alright, so now we're going to get to shimming these valves, and you may wonder in a situation like this, like, where do you start? Well, with this particular situation, just put back the shims that were in there. You got to start somewhere. We got to have something in there to get some sort of a measurement. Now it's critical that you torque these down. If not, you can warp these cam holders and cause a lot of damage to the camshaft and the holder and the head itself. So torquing this is going to be extremely important. So if you guys are looking for tightening sequences or torque values or how to do anything on these bikes, or anything for that matter, go on over to emanualonline.com. They got pretty much a manual for anything you want. Their prices are absolutely great. And until August 31st of 2024, if you use my discount code RestoroosterOHV, you get 22% off an already great price manual. So if you need them, check them out. And I'll put the links down in the description. When you purchase from them, you get a great deal. You help me out, you help yourself out, and you help them out. It's a win-win for everybody. All right, let's get some measurements. What we want to do is line our timing marks up. So for the intake, there's 2 marks. This one here is marked with a white pen, but normally it won't be. There's a little dot there, and there's a dot that's going to be at 12 o'clock. Line that dot up with the head, and that's how your cam should sit. And the top of your camshaft should be flat. And it's the same thing on the exhaust cam. The more critical one is going to be the one that lines up with the head. This one may not point straight up. This is actually for counting pins between your timing chain, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But again, the top of the camshaft should be flat. If you're noticing that your timing marks are lined up and it's like that or like that, you more than likely got what they call as a spun gear. So these gears are just pressed onto the camshaft, and what happens is sometimes they'll spin. So your timing marks will be 100% right. Your camshaft will be way off, and this thing won't start. It's backfiring, sputtering, just won't do anything. And that's going to be your problem. And they're tricky to figure out sometimes. But this one looks okay, so we'll get some measurements on it. I'm going to start with my minimum measurement, which is 0.10 millimeter for the intake. And that will not go through. But it does go through on this one, so we'll go up to the next highest size, which for me is 0.13, and it does not go through. So technically this one is in spec, so I'm going to call this 0.12, and I don't really have to touch this. I generally like to shim these on the higher side of the number, which for the intakes is 0.09 to 0.16 millimeter. So I'd rather have closer to 0.16, but I'm not going to mess with it. That's good enough. Let me see if I can get a measurement on this other one. 0.09 is dragging, but it does go 0.09 millimeter is where we're at. So with this one here, I'm going to go with the next smallest shim, which will open up my gap a little bit. 0.17 to 0.24 on the exhaust side. So I've got 0.18 is going to be my minimum. And that goes through fine. And that goes through fine on both of these. Let's just make sure they're not too big. 0.20 does not go in. So I want to say on this one 0.18. 0.20 does go in there. 0.23 does not go in. So the last recorded measurement I had was 0.20, which is within spec. This one is within spec. This one was within spec. And this one technically is within spec. I just want to go a little bit larger with this one. One size shim. Let's take a measurement of the shim. And 1.75. So like I said, I want to go one more small. We're going to go 1.70. And this unit takes 7.48 millimeter shims. There we go. And that takes care of the shimming. Let's go ahead and get this head installed on the engine. Make sure you put a little engine oil on the threads and on the washers on your main head bolts before you drop them. We're going to torque these in a cross pattern in 2 steps, 18 and then 36 foot-pounds. Before I go too far, I want to check to make sure this is pumping oil. Can't put too much in here right now because this cover's not on, but you can get enough to get the pump working. Now we'll get this engine on top dead center. Usually a good way to tell is your woodruff key should be pointing straight up the engine. And this can be verified by dropping a long screwdriver or straw down the spark plug hole and rotating your engine back and forth until that screwdriver or straw is at the very top of its travel. Now we can get our exhaust cam hooked up. Following the 2 dots, like I said last time, the dot all the way to the left is going to be the most critical. Line that right up with the head. One thing to keep in mind is to keep the front part of this chain taut. If it's loose and you line it up, it's going to be off. So keep that just slightly tensioned, dot lined up with the head. Make sure you don't move your crankshaft, and we get our exhaust intake cam on. This one can sometimes be a little trickier. Wow, looks like I might have got it first time. Now this is where those top dots come into play that we were talking about earlier. So what we want is 13 pins between them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13 lines up with that pin. So you know this timing is 100% correct. We can get our cam caps bolted back on, torqued down, make sure everything's running free. I got to get some caps for these. The ones that they had with it just don't fit. Also, I didn't realize that they didn't have the gaskets for the valve cover bolts, so I have to order those as well. But she's good enough to get back inside the frame now. Well, I went ahead and pulled this carburetor apart, and I'm glad I did. It was filthy, and I don't mean filthy like just like gummed up gasoline. Filthy like somebody left it out in the rain for 6 years. There's a lot of corrosion, so I got to do a lot of cleaning. I got a rebuild kit for it. I got a mid-body kit for it, and I got a new hot start plunger kit for it. I'll double check this chain tension once I get the full weight of the bike on the suspension. You know what it is. Squirts. All right, we come to that time again. See if all the patience and virtue paid off. Something don't sound right. She's hissing. It's sucking in through the carburetor, that's for sure. The idle's not high enough. You know, sometimes with these bikes, when you do a carburetor rebuild, an engine rebuild, and yeah, sometimes they're kind of a pain to get started right away, because turns out with this one, I think that I didn't have the idle screw up as high as it needed to be. You could definitely hear it sucking through the carburetor. Got to catch my breath a little. I hate kicking. Shut your mouth, Jeffrey. Anyway, it seems like it runs pretty good. Obviously, it's going to need some tuning to the carburetor a little bit. I'm not going to do any of that stuff until I get the airbox back on and get the intake restriction where it's supposed to be before I start doing any idle adjustments or anything like that. So that's going to be my next step, but I'm very pleased. She is running. Dodged another bullet here. Let me get this one together and I'll be right back. Yeah, she's running real good. Sounds nice. Time to get this thing out. Up and down the road a little bit. Well, we got the test ride in right before the rain started. Turns out we got another success story here, which is fantastic. I want to thank all of you for watching and all your support. If you'd like to support the channel and you like what you see, it doesn't cost you anything. Hit that subscribe button, hit that thumbs up, really helps the channel out. Also, if you need a service manual, keep in mind you can get a great deal on a service manual through emanualonline.com. I'll put the link and my discount code. You get 22% off until August 31st, 2024. And they got downloadable PDF manuals that you can download to your computer or even keep on your phone. It'll have all the specs, just like the factory service manual. Once again, I want to thank you guys. Throw this one in the books. Onward and upward to the next project. We'll see you then.